Hello everybody, this is Danny from Deep South Homestead in collaboration with Grandpa's Farm on the 5 most useful tools used on a homestead. Well, today is the big day. Today is the day for tool number 1. And I know there's been a lot of speculation about what that tool would be for us here at Deep South Homestead. So before I actually tell you what the tool is, I'm going to tell you a story, because this story ties in with the reason this tool is number 1 for us here on the homestead. And the story begins about a young guy. He's about, I think around 15 to 16 years old is where the story begins. And this young guy had a dream in his life of something that he wanted to do and be a part of. He spent every fleeting moment preparing for this dream that he wanted to live. He worked extremely hard. He would get out and he would run and he would get his body into physical condition and do all that he could do. He would mentally try to prepare himself for the big event that lied ahead of him, because that was his dream. And as the years would go by, he would get better and better and better at what he done, to the point where he could run indefinitely and he never got tired. His side never hurt. He just had energy abounding. He was in great physical condition for the job that lied ahead of him. And then, when he was about 17 years old, tragedy struck. And left him immobile for almost a year. Spent a lot of time on crutches. He spent a lot of time in a wheelchair. Spent time learning how to walk all over again. He became very angry at this point, because it seemed like his dream was out of reach at that point. So he began to, when he got where he could walk a little bit again, he got back to where he could do a few things. He decided to pick up where he left off at and try to get back where he was. And he pushed himself and pushed himself and pushed himself back. The doctors had told him that he probably would never be able to run again like he did, or, he'd have all kind of physical conditions the rest of his life. But after pushing himself and pushing himself, he got back to where he could run again, almost as good as what he could before. But because his ankles wouldn't bend like they used to and stuff, he wasn't quite as fast as he used to be. But he regained most all of his physical strength back, and most of his physical ability, his flexibility, everything came back to him. And he was so proud of what he had accomplished. And he went to apply for this particular job that he had wanted to do, because he was going to make a career out of this. And when he did, they were excited about him being there. Yes, they told him up front, yes, you're more than qualified. As a matter of fact, we've looked at your records. We've even pulled your records and looked, and we would love to have you. But the guy was extremely excited. He was supposed to go take a test and see where he scored at, so they'd know what really his capabilities were. And about 2 or 3 days before he was supposed to leave to go out of town to take this test, a guy showed up at his door and said, I've got your medical records here and I need to ask you some questions. And as he went over the questions, he asked him, is it true that you have a pin still in your right femur? And the guy said, yeah. Is it true that you've had this problem and this problem and this problem. And the guy said, "It is, sir, but I've overcome those things." And he said, "Well, I know you might have overcome them, but because you've had them, we're not going to be able to accept you into this position." And he left. Well, the guy was extremely heartbroken. And as the days would linger on and thoughts would run through his mind about how hard he had tried and how much he'd prepared, he began to get angry. Bitterness began to set in. He became somewhat of a problem person at that time. Almost what you'd call rebellious. Didn't really listen to anybody anymore. Didn't really do things that he was told to do. And the worst part of all of it, he was angry at God. Because he felt like God had allowed this to happen in his life, and there wasn't a thing he could do about it. His dream, he felt like, was shattered. And as the years would roll by, the bitterness just seemed to get worse, and the anger, and then one day he was asked to go to a church revival, and he did. And when he went, see, he was having all kind of physical problems at this time. The doctors, he'd been in and out of doctors' offices and hospitals, and they thought he was dying. And he thought he was dying. The doctors told him, said, "We definitely know there's something wrong with you, son. We just haven't found it yet." And as he sat in this revival meeting, the preacher was preaching up a storm. And he just stopped right in the middle of what he was doing. He walked off the podium where the pulpit was at, and he got in the middle of the aisle, and he walked down the aisle, because this gentleman was sitting about halfway back through the auditorium. And he walked up to the guy, didn't know him from Adam. And he looked at him and he said, "Son, you're not going to die. God's not through with you yet." And he turned around and he walked back up and he got up on that podium and he said, "You know, I don't know why I did that, but I was just led to do it. Son, I don't mean anything by it. I was just led to do that." And he went right back to preaching. Well, this young man was so moved that at the end of the service, he got his life right with God. And he accepted the Lord into his life. And it's like a huge burden had been lifted off of him after all these years. And he went home that night, felt so good, felt so relieved. And as the days would go by, God began to speak to this young man. And the young guy told him, says, "Lord, I don't know what I can do for you because the dream that I had has been lost. And I'm sorry that I blamed you for it, because really it wasn't your fault. It was my dream." But as the young guy asked the Lord, he said, "Lord, what I want from you is, what do you want me to do for you?" And the Lord told him, said, "Son, I want you to be a soldier for me." And as the young man sat there, he said, "Lord, there's nothing in me anymore that has any fight left." Because you see, this young guy, that's what he wanted to be, was a soldier. He wanted to be a very elite soldier. And he said, "Lord, I don't think I can do it." But as he began to read in the scriptures and study his Bible, the Lord led him to a particular passage in the Bible, in Proverbs. And he told him, he said, son, this is what I want you to get. And when you get it, you'll understand. In Proverbs 8 and 11, there's a particular verse there that says to get wisdom, because her price is far above anything else on the face of the earth, even rubies or gold. And the young man didn't quite understand at that time. But as he began to dig deeper, the Lord showed him also in Proverbs. There's another verse. Proverbs chapter 4, verses 5, I think it's through about 9. The Lord told him, says, son, when you get wisdom, along with it, get understanding. Well, the young man then was extremely confused. But knowing that the Lord had him on a journey, he continued on. And then one day, he had reached the end of his rope and he said, Lord, I don't know what you're doing. I'm tired of trying to figure this thing out. I just tell me what it is that you want. And the Lord led him to a passage in the Old Testament about a man named Solomon. For those who are my Hebrew friends, Shlomo. He was also called King Lemuel. And in this particular man's life in the Bible there, Solomon, the Bible says that he, as a young child, was put into a position of authority when his father David had passed away. And he was too young to rule a country. And he fell on his face before God. And he said, Lord, all I want in life is to have the wisdom to lead your people. He didn't ask for anything else. He didn't ask for land or money or anything. And God told him, said, because you didn't ask for all the other things in life and only ask for wisdom, I'm going to give you all the other things also. And you see, after God led this young man to that particular passage, it struck a note in this young man's heart where God was trying to take him. And the young man got his Bible out and he opened it to that passage and he said, Lord, you said in your word that it would not return void unto you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this same very prayer that Solomon prayed. And that's my prayer for my life also. And as the young man knelt down there, opened his Bible up to the particular passage there in the Old Testament, and he began to read the very words that Solomon spoke about asking for nothing but wisdom, because this young man said, Lord, I don't care if I ever have money. I don't care if I ever own anything. All I want is the wisdom to do what you want me to do. And when the young man got up, he had such a burden lifted off of him, because he felt like he had finally arrived at where God had wanted him to go. And as time would go on, he would try to figure out what it was that God wanted him to do. But what he didn't realize was, through his whole life, God was leading him through a series of lessons to teach this young man wisdom. And after the young man had reached his older age, it finally dawned on him one day what God was trying to do. He wanted him to work with his people and lead his people and to be a blessing to his people. And my friend, the young man that's now an older man is the one that sits before you in this camera. God's been good to me my whole life. He has sent me through some trials and some tribulations that it's been hard. I've had a lot of things happen in my life. Been very blessed also. I've built and paid for 3 homes. I've owned 3 different businesses. I've been very successful. And now God allows me to live the life that I always wanted. My health may not be the best, but God never promised me good health. But He's kept His word. He gave me the wisdom that I always wanted. And my friend, my number one tool on the homestead that I'm going to pass along to you is wisdom. Wisdom is the greatest tool that you'll ever possess on a homestead. And let me tell you a little bit about wisdom. Wisdom is knowledge guided by understanding. That's what wisdom is. Because if you'll notice in the Bible, there's the verses that I told you, if you was to read them, the Lord told us in them passages, when you get wisdom, get understanding also. Because see, with all the wisdom in the world, if you don't have understanding, it's useless. And with the real true definition of wisdom being knowledge guided by understanding, you ask yourself the question, what is knowledge? Well, my friend, knowledge is the things that we acquire as we live on the face of this earth here. It's the things that we learn. It's the things that we're taught through from God. It's all those things are knowledge. All the things we read about, life experiences, and all these things is knowledge. But you know what? It's all useless without understanding. And you see, understanding is the ability to put the right thing in the right place at the right time. That's what understanding is. So therefore, if you take wisdom and you've got understanding to go with it, then you can take wisdom and you can apply it where it's need to be applied and when it needs to be applied, when it's at its most effective time to be applied. And that, my friend, is when you will be your most productive and make the fewest amount of mistakes and be extremely successful at what you do. So keep in mind today that the number one tool that I believe on a homestead that you can possess is wisdom. Thank you from Deep South Homestead.